My friends had joked with me like, oh, you're going to meet an Italian guy and you're going to fall in love and that's the last we're ever going to see of you. And I was like, ha ha ha, yeah, okay. I came back with my tail between my legs. Italians will date for 5 to 10 years before even the thought of marriage enters the chat. And even then, sometimes marriage isn't even on the table because it doesn't have as much value. This older man just stopped on the street and just stared and like looked me up and down. The amount of Italians I get that they're like, you left the American dream to come here. Like it got to my father. Like they're like, what did you do? And this American dream, I don't think it has the same meaning that it once did. This terrifies me, but I'm gonna regret it if I don't do it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another podcast. Today's guest is an American creator with a story that is very similar to so many movies we love. A girl goes to Italy, falls in love with an Italian, and after some real soul searching, moves back to live out the pasta and gelato-filled Italian dream. Today, my guest is Kacie Rose. She has amassed an insane number of followers on social media, 1,500,000 in total, and has recently published a book called You Deserve Good Gelato, which tracks her life story. So welcome, Kacie. I'm excited to have you on the show.
I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to chat. Can you tell I'm just waiting? I'm like, let's talk.
I love that your energy on social media and your energy in real life is exactly the same.
Oh, that's okay. It's because I have no filter. That's why.
And as I've told you, and as I've told you before, we started filming, I said, like, this is what people actually really need. We've had enough of the filtered reality on Instagram. We need some more real creators like you.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Thank you. That's very sweet.
So I'd love to hear your life story, obviously. I mean, I've read up on it. I know why you moved back to Italy, but I'd love to hear it from you. Tell us.
Yeah. So it kind of all started in 2018. I was a professional dancer in New York, just to give you like a little summary moment. I was a professional dancer in New York. And I was at a place where I was just not super happy with what was happening in my life. That industry is very complicated. It's very difficult. And so kind of on a whim, I booked a solo trip to Italy. I'd always felt like I wanted to go. I kept waiting for somebody to go with, and then years went by and I was still waiting, and I decided one day, fuck it, I'm going to do it. So I did. Yeah. And then on that solo trip, I did Venice, Florence, and Rome. And on my first day in Florence, I met Dario, my boyfriend. We did long distance for a year, kind of a summary, long distance for a year. Then he came to live with me in New York for a year. And then in January 2021, we moved back to Italy together, and it was on a 6-month trial basis. And here we are 3 years later, just never left.
Okay. Rewind. Oh. You met Dario on your first day?
Yeah. First day in Florence. I had spent 2 days in Venice before that, and then 3 days in Florence. And then I did 4 days in Rome after that. But first day in Florence, yeah. I went to a jazz club. It's called Jazz Club Firenze, if anybody is in Florence and wants to check it out. It's really cool. It's like an underground spot. I went just because a friend who had studied abroad told me to go, and he was there. That's literally it. I wish it was more than that, but no, he was there. He was sitting across the room, and we kind of clocked eyes as I came in. I was like, he's kind of cute, but I'm not going to say anything because I was solo. I was like, I did this solo trip basically to like do things that scared me and kind of challenge myself. So I was like, I'm going to go to this jazz club. I'm going to just be there for one song. I'll suss out the vibe. And if I don't like it, I can always leave. And I went, stood in the back, clocked eyes. He came over after like 10 minutes, said, ciao. I said, ciao. I said, that's all the Italian I got for you. He said, it's okay. We can speak in English. And the rest is history.
What a story. I've been to Italy so many times.
Yeah.
And all I've gotten... Well, I've been all over, to be honest. I've gone to Naples. I've gone even to the south, to Calabria. And nice. I guess, at the back of your mind, when you travel to Italy, you're always waiting for that story because we've been fed these stories, like these movies. I mean, even lately there was a wonderful series. I don't know if you watched that. I'm sure you have. It's called From Scratch.
So many people, I haven't watched it. I haven't watched it yet because so many people keep telling me, they're like, it's so similar to your story. And I'm like, I feel like it would be a little weird to like watch it.
Yeah.
I still have to watch it. Yeah.
I,
I gotta
I
watch
definitely hope it's not similar to your story because it has a really tragic
it.
ending.
I've heard that too. People are like, it's just like you. And I'm like, God, I hope not. Like,
Yeah, the guy gets
jeez.
terminal cancer. Not to be a spoiler alert here, but I hope that's not your story. But yeah, the beginning is basically like that, as where the girl goes to exactly American Girls goes to Italy, meets an Italian guy, and that's an insane story. That's something you read about literally
Yeah.
in a book, and you don't think that's ever going to happen to you, and it happened to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, it's funny because when I booked the solo trip, I did it for me and me alone. And I still stand by. I stand by completely that you do not need a romantic relationship when you're traveling in order to make it fulfilling. Like it is an added bonus if it happens, but it's not necessary at all to have a fulfilling trip. But yeah, my friends had joked with me like, "Oh, you're going to meet an Italian guy and you're going to fall in love and that's the last we're ever going to see of you." And I was like, "Ha ha ha, yeah, okay." Um, and then I walked back. I came back with my tail between my legs, and I was like, "So I met a guy." Yeah.
Yeah, and then you moved back to the US, and I mean, I'm assuming
Mhm.
Dario was a huge part of the reason that you moved back to Italy, but was there something else that drove you to leave the US?
Yeah, I mean, 2020 was tragic for a lot of reasons that I don't think I need to go into, but there was also a lot of silver linings. And one of my silver linings during that whole time period was the fact that I was able to come to the realization that maybe I wasn't happy doing what I was doing, going back to performing and going back to, the performing industry and all that. I was at a point before COVID where I hated the industry so much that I started to hate dance itself. And I don't want to hate dance because that's a big part of my life. But it had gotten to a point where I just was so unhappy. I was having frequent anxiety attacks. I was feeling stuck. I was working like 3, 4 jobs just to like get by. Like I was in a really um not healthy place to be. And so when COVID happened and my entire industry shut down and everything completely stopped, I could not do it even if I wanted to. And instead of feeling upset about that, I was relieved. And I was like, ooh, that's something that I should probably pay attention to. If I'm feeling relieved that I don't have to go to auditions, that I don't have to go to dance class, that I don't have to like post online, like that's something I should probably listen to. And so all the rest of that year was me coming to that realization. And then, at the end of Dario's visa, which his visa was up in December 2020, um, it was kind of like my industry wasn't opening anytime soon. And it was another one of those moments where we had this opportunity to move to Italy because Italy was still accepting study visas. And it was one of those moments where it was like, this terrifies me, but I'm going to regret it if I don't do it. So we moved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening recently to a podcast and they said like whenever you have a major decision in front of you, the reason you know that it's a good decision to make, or let's say that it's the right choice to make, is that you kind of feel yourself expanding. Even though something terrifies you, you feel kind of like a sense of possibility.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
a bad decision or something that's not in line with what you want, you kind of feel yourself like shrinking, like you're not excited about
Yeah.
it. That's the difference.
Yeah. A friend once told me if it's a yes in your body, then it's a yes in real life. And I couldn't agree with her more. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a strong
Absolutely.
believer in that if you do something that truly aligns with who you are, everything kind of falls into place eventually, at least.
Yeah.
But if you go against
Absolutely.
yourself, it's just never going to work. That's the way it's been for
Yeah.
me, at least. Hmm.
No, me too. Absolutely. It's like if you had told me 5 years ago that I would be doing this, that I'd be sitting here with you, I would have thought you were out of your mind. There was just no way. But because like, I don't know, it's just about grabbing life and about, grabbing all the opportunities that life is just waiting to give to you. You just have to be brave enough to take them.
Yeah, and I think so many people out there are fearful about making that big move because it is scary. And thankfully, you
Mhm.
had Dario. You had kind of, I
Yeah.
think, another reason to move to Italy. Would you have
Mhm.
done it if you
Mhm.
hadn't met him? Do you think?
I, you know, I don't even want to say if I hadn't met him, but yes and no, because I've always been interested about what life would be like abroad. But I think the thing that was keeping me very chained in my comfort zone was this fear of change, this fear of doing something different. And when honestly, again, COVID was the kind of the thing that started changing that for me. And it was one of those things that, especially with my performance career, which was something that I had built up in my mind since I was a little girl, like since I was 3 years old, I was dancing and I was like, I'm going to be on Broadway. I'm going to be a professional dancer. Like that's what I'm going to do. And I don't know if I think I needed something to stop me, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know if I would have been able to pull myself out of it. Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a tricky question to answer. That's a tricky
Yeah,
one.
I guess if everything was going smoothly the way it had in the past, you would have had less of an incentive to change something, right?
Mhm.
Because I think we change
Mhm.
something where we feel like really stuck. Like, okay, this is not going anywhere. I'm not happy about this. Like, I'm not happy. So this is when
Yeah.
I change something. But before that, when people are kind of in the middle, kind of in that
Mhm.
gray zone, it's easy just to stay in it, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just like, again, it's your comfort zone, right? Like you stay chained in your comfort zone. We stay chained to our routines for a reason. It's because they're safe. And nothing bad happens when we're chained in our comfort zones. And I think a big thing for me was even like booking my solo trip was just getting out of my comfort zone. And that's a really scary thing to do. And it's about doing the shit that scares you because life is just too short not to. And the whole reason why I made that first leap and then from that moment of my solo trip, why it was not easier, but I had um not more incentive. I don't even know the right word for it, honestly. But the reason why I was able from that point on to keep doing these scary things and keep making these scary, jumps, um, is because I thought of if I'm on my deathbed and I'm looking back and I'm regretting not doing things just because I was too scared to do them, like that to me is 10 times scarier than just doing the scary thing. Like that's not good enough for me. And it's not good enough for you. It's not good enough for anybody. Like we don't get a do-over at the end of our life. Like that is it. We have an expiration date. And if we are looking back and regretting not doing something because we're too scared to do it, like that's scarier to me than just doing the scary thing. And I think coming to that realization, has helped me make a lot of choices that I'm so grateful to be making, that I don't know if I would have made before kind of coming to that realization.
Yes, 100%. I think we have to choose the kind of discomfort we want. Is it discomfort now
Mhm.
or is it discomfort later when you realize you've been going
Yeah.
completely off your own path,
Yeah.
right? And then you have to live
Yeah.
with that. And it's much harder to reverse the course later. I think it's still possible for anybody that wants to
Yeah.
do it. But yeah, I think that's very interesting for me that, um, and this is something I wasn't going to talk about prior to the podcast. I was just going to talk
Yeah.
about culture shock and, living in Italy. But for
Yeah.
me, it's interesting to hear stories like this where you're just like, I took my first solo trip and then I was like, you know what? I did that. I was capable of doing that. Let me do the next step. I'm capable of so much
Yeah.
more now, right? It's like you
Yeah.
you started already. So if you can do one thing, you can do the rest, basically.
Well, you start to realize that you're so much more capable than you think you are, right? And I think like that's kind of, where my mindset is and kind of why I started doing what I'm doing now because I just genuinely believe that we are all so much more capable than we think we are. It's just we have to be brave enough to take that first step and we have to be brave enough to do things that scare us.
So you
Yeah.
arrived to Italy, you live in Florence,
Yeah.
and let's talk about culture shocks. I love hearing culture shocks. It's my
Like,
little
girl, let's
obsession.
do it. Lay it on me. I'm ready.
So I've obviously stalked your Instagram. I don't know if stalking is the right word, as it's open to the
That's okay.
to the
We can go with
public.
it.
But I've gone through it, and yeah, obviously a lot of it is on culture shocks and things you have to know when you're living in Italy. But what were like the major ones that really surprised you as an American?
Mm. It's so funny because I get this question all the time, and it's usually like, what's the biggest culture shock? And it's to me, I think the thing, that I realize when it's not even the big ones like the language or anything like that. It's those small culture shocks that you would never think to like Google or ask somebody, or like you would never think is different. Like they're not things that would cross your mind, right? And so
Mhm.
all those were the things that were the biggest to me. So things like, for example, when we landed in Italy, there was a 2-week mandatory quarantine. So we were inside for 2 weeks. And then when our 2-week quarantine was up, it was Dario's birthday. And so I was like, I'm going to like give a big surprise. I'm going to decorate the apartment. Like I'm going full out. Right. And I had no idea where to go to get any of this stuff, but there was a pharmacy across the street. So I was like, great, a pharmacy. In my head, I'm thinking CVS, Dwayne Reed, like, like our pharmacies in the US are basically like little mini markets, right? And so it just didn't cross my mind. I was like, yeah, a pharmacy, they'll have birthday cards. Didn't cross my mind. And so I walked in and I did a lap, and it was all the normal things you'd find in a pharmacy, like medicine and high-end skincare and stuff. I didn't see any birthday cards. So I marched my booty up right to the pharmacist, and I was like typing in Google Translate because I didn't know any Italian at that point. And I flipped the camera. It was like, where are do you have birthday cards? And the way she looked at me, I swear I was like, I think I grew 3 heads, because the way she looked at me, she was like, questa è una farmacia. Like and I didn't need Google Translate for that one. I was like, cool. And so I went home. I didn't know where to get a birthday card. So I went home and I scribbled on like a scrap piece of notebook paper, and that was his birthday card for the year, because I didn't know where I was supposed to go. And they're called carteria, by the way. There's like specific stores for birthday cards and gift supplies, but I didn't know. Or like things like going to the grocery store, like in the US, or most parts of the US, because I think down in Texas they do this, but in most parts of the US where I grew up, your fruit and your vegetables, you bag them yourself, but they weigh them at the cashier, right? Not in Italy. No. In Italy, you have to weigh them before you get to the cashier and print out like a little price sticker. And then you take them up to the cashier. Again, I didn't know this. So I took all my fruits and veggies and I walked up to the cashier and I put them down, and none of them had price stickers. So I had to basically do like the walk of shame, like gather them all back up and like walk past the line of Italians who were like, why didn't she get a sticker? And it's just like, it's little things like that where it's just like, you don't know because they're so small and seemingly insignificant that you would never think that they would be like, big culture shocks.
Yeah, those are great examples, because I mean, obviously with the first example, Americans drugstore is just the name for it. In Canada, we have something similar, but you have basically everything there. You have toys, you have chocolate, you have
pet supplies, baby supplies. Yeah, everything.
Yeah, everything. And in Italy, and I mean in I think all of Europe, actually, I would say. I'm not sure if it's all of Europe, but definitely like Portugal, Spain.
Minus the
lied.
UK.
Minus the UK. They definitely it's just a pharmacy, but you have pharmacies like on every corner, right?
Yeah, a pharmacia. Yeah, but then there's the other thing. Like, gosh, the other one in Italy, like they closed down for 3 hours in the middle of the day, and that was very bizarre too. When I like needed medicine, and I went at 1:30, and it was like, no, we're at lunch. It's like, oh, okay.
It's super interesting listening to these. I've definitely had the incident with not weighing the fruits and vegetables as well. And I'm trying, as we're talking, I'm trying to remember, where was that? It might have been in Italy, you're right. Or somewhere else in Europe where you have to do it yourself. And then they kind of look at you like you're a complete idiot. Like, how could you not know that you had to do this? And then you have to go back and do it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's like literally like it's the equivalent of like a walk of shame. I'm like, I am so embarrassed. But it's okay.
Exactly.
It is what it is. It's a learning experience,
You know what's interesting? When I was in Florence, I remember, I guess for me, Italians are going to hate me for this, but for me, it's still very difficult to come to terms with very small coffees, because when I was in Italy, I was teaching English online. And when you're doing that, you need like a big cup of coffee to get you through the 4 hours of teaching. And I remember I really wanted a coffee, and I went to obviously to get coffee in Italy. And the coffees are very small in size, which is they're the way better coffee than in the US.
Of course.
But it's really small for me. And at one point I really wanted a tea. And the woman didn't know what to do with me, because tea is not very common.
Not really. No, not in bars. I mean, they have it, but it's not. Yeah, it's very rare to find an Italian like going to a bar to drink a tea, It's mostly
Exactly.
coffee. Yeah. Yeah,
And the
yeah,
way
yeah.
she looked at
It's
me, she
yeah.
looked at me like I was a traitor to the entire country. Like, how could you
Oh,
order a tea? And then she plopped this like bag, this tea bag, put some water, not even enough water.
no. It's like a dusty tea bag that's like on the back shelf. She's like, this is all we got.
Exactly.
I'm sure, like probably trying so hard to accommodate you, but just like, I don't know. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, these
Yeah,
are
I get
great.
it.
These are great.
Yeah.
Do you have any others that were,
Oh.
when it comes to Italians and
Mhm.
either communication styles or mannerisms or anything like that, was it at all? I mean, was it very different from Americans?
Oh my gosh, it's night and day. It's two completely different cultures, right? Like two completely different set of norms, two completely different traditions, two completely different just like ways of life. So there are so many differences, especially like, gosh, like I don't even like staring, for example. Like let's start with that. Like staring is so normal in Italian culture. And I guess like at least again where I grew up in the US, because the US is so big, Canada I'm sure is the same. At least where I grew up in the US and in American culture, like staring is really rude. Like you're not supposed to stare. But I remember probably one of the first times we went out, I was with Dario. And again, like I didn't really speak Italian that well. And this older man just stopped on the street and just stared and like looked me up and down and was just openly staring. And I was like, I didn't know what to do. And eventually he asked, he's like, how tall are you? And Dario was like, oh, she's, this height. And then that's all and then he left. But it was like a full 5 minutes of just this interaction. And it's just, yeah, it's things like that in terms of communication style. It varies depending on Italy, but so, it's very honest and very blunt and very coming from an American culture where we're very smiley and very polite. This
Trying
is
not
what
to
I hear
offend as
from
well, right? Trying not to
trying
offend.
not to offend. Yes,
Yeah.
just very like polite. And I hear that from Italians a lot where they're just like, you guys smile so much and you're just like, you are very smiley. But coming into Italy where maybe that's not necessarily the case, Italians are very kind, they're very polite, but definitely not in the same way as Americans are. And so kind of the first couple of months I was here, I had to wrap my head around that and be like, okay, this is just a different way of being polite. Let's say, yeah.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the staring because as soon as you said that, I remember it just taking the metro and people openly looking you up and down. And I don't, I'm from Canada. Like when you're talking about being polite and not staring, for
Yeah.
sure.
You
Never.
guys take it to the next level. You Canadians. I love
Exactly.
you.
Exactly. But I'm originally Russian. So I'm very much aware of the
Okay.
directness, and like it's
Yep.
a very direct country. So I'm torn right in the
Yeah.
middle. But I think you're very
Yeah.
right when you say that there's less of a filter to conversations as well.
Hmm.
Recently,
Hmm.
we went out for dinner with a friend of mine, and there was an Italian guy there, and he was just like, how old are you to her? And she just was like, I don't want to answer that. He's like, oh, but come on, but how old are you? And he just kept on pressing her and pressing her. And I kept on thinking, wow, Italians can be very direct, actually.
Very direct, very direct. No filter is a really good way to put it. And it's not, again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just very much a difference in culture. Kind of what you said, like it in American culture, in Canadian culture, in Russian culture, maybe, I'm not sure. But you don't ask a woman her age, right? Like you just don't do that. But that's maybe not the case here. It's just two different cultures. And it can be really tricky in that way, right? To like it's so normal to misinterpret something as rude when it's not rude in that culture. It's just the way that culture is. It's not seen as rude, but it's seen as rude in the other culture. And it can get really tricky with like miscommunications, right? I'm thinking of like when Dario and I first started dating in Midwest American culture, where I am from, where I grew up. And this is very, again, I'm going to repeat myself for the thousandth time just to like really drive it home, but it's so different than the rest of the US. But where I grew up, um, a very like normal and acceptable answer to somebody who says, thank you. Like if you did a service for them, thank you. A really normal like answer is like, like, yeah, or no worries. Sure. Four completely normal answers. And it's meant to indicate that like what you asked me to do was not an inconvenience. So the thank you is not necessary. Like it's just a way to be like, you don't need to thank me. But in Italian culture and many other cultures, even in the US, it is rude. And so when Dario and I first started dating and he'd be like, thank you, I'd be like, mm-hmm. And it started to bother him. And eventually he was like, are you mad at me or something? Like, why are you mad at me? And we had to sit down and I was like, of course I'm not mad at you. What are you talking about? And we had to like sit down and talk about it and be like, this is not rude in my culture. Like, and he understands now and it ended up fine, but it was definitely like a miscommunication that if we didn't sit down and talk about it, it would have been interpreted very, very differently. Yeah. And there's a lot of those.
Yeah, I would love to hear more of these examples. And I love that you preface that with, by the way, saying Midwest is very different because
Yeah.
we have these conversations come up a lot where someone will talk about a specific part of the US and then all the other Americans will chip in and say, well, it's not the way it is in Texas or,
Yeah.
Ohio.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's a nice way to preface it. And as well, how interesting it is to have two cultures and the way you kind of interpret each other and then to talk about it and to I think the important thing is to communicate it, right? Because he comes into the relationship with his set of expectations and you come into the relationship with yours and it's two cultures clashing and you might not even know it. You might say, oh, well, he's just rude or he's just whatever, XXX,
You have to take things with a grain of salt and like maybe understand that it's a miscommunication on a cultural level, on a language level, on an everything level, right? Another one that was another big thing, kind of similar to my was in Italian, there's like a command form. It's senti, which means listen. And it's not in Italian, it's almost like a connective tissue. Like it indicates like, hey, there's this really cool thing that I want to tell you. And like, just to really get your attention, I'm going to say senti so that like your ears perk up and you know that what I'm telling you is important, right? It's not like a listen. It's more just like a, hey. But when Dario, even though when we met, he spoke pretty good English and he continued to improve after we dated, longer and longer. When he was first, speaking, he would say, listen a lot, like in kind of like in a command form, like how he would translate it from Italian to English. And eventually like it would bother me. And then eventually I was like, wait a second. I told my ego to take a seat and I was like, I think this might be, he's not a rude person. This has to be like something that is a cultural difference. And so I sat down and I was like, why are you commanding me to listen when I'm very clearly listening? And he was like, isn't that like what you like? It's this in Italian. Like, isn't it the same way in English? And I was like, no, this isn't the same way in English. So it's, again, one of those things that's like, it very easily could have been interpreted as me being like, well, he is just an asshole. He's not. He's just like him being confused over a language thing. And vice versa with them. He could have been like, this girl is just rude, until I explained that it's just how, in my culture growing up, it was normal to say thank you or you're welcome.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And, I make a lot of videos about cultural differences. Obviously, this is what I do. And I get a lot of, they're great as conversation starters, but I always laugh because there's no right or wrong, right? When it comes to gender norms, when it comes to expectations, like we're born into our culture and then people will go out and start a fight over something that's it's just a different way to live, really, right? It's the way you see the world.
Yeah.
And, when it comes to dating Dario, obviously you haven't dated any other Italian men, I'm assuming.
No.
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 Have you?
I appreciate you asking, but no. I saw the pause and I was like, no. It's okay, keep going.
When it comes to dating Dario and dating Americans or the Americans that you've dated, have you noticed any differences between the two?
Yeah, big time. Italian men are, and again, this is just me being like Dario, but I see it also with my, with friends and just, I see it with other Italian men as well. Italian men are very romantic and they're very straightforward and they're very, when they want something, they're like very upfront about it. And I'm like, listen, no games. I appreciate it. Like, let's do it. And in that way, like they definitely know how to woo you and take you off your feet for sure. Yeah.
Do you feel like Americans tend to hold back more? Is it more about like don't show the vulnerable side, don't show too
Yes.
much interest?
Yes. And I definitely think it comes from like a cultural point in Italy where I think Italian men, and I think just Italians in general, they're very much more in tune with their emotions, and they're also not afraid to show emotion, whether that be, you know, with family or friends or strangers. Like they are a passionate culture, and they're a very open culture in that way. And they have this, like, I think it ties back to this sense of community that they have, where it's like, tell me your burdens, tell me your problems, tell me your triumphs. Like they just have this sense of community that's built into the culture that comes from a standpoint of like not being embarrassed to share how you're feeling. And again, this is all just in my experience, but I think that really translates into the world of dating, where it's just like they don't have any embarrassment over being like, I really like you, or I love you, or, you know, this is how I'm feeling. Like they're very open in that way.
Has it been refreshing for you in that sense that like,
Yeah.
oh, well, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been, you know, it was strange at first, right? Because like, it was something that I just wasn't used to. It was something, you know, I was used to American men and just, you know, kind of that nature of beating around the bush, if you will, or, you know, taking time or trying to get straight answers. And that's not to say all American men are like that, but it was just in my experience, what I saw with friends, what I saw with myself, what I saw the biggest difference was. And so coming into a culture and into a relationship where that wasn't an issue, it was very direct and very open. It was a nice change. It was strange at first because I didn't know how to like handle it, but it was a nice change for sure.
It reminds me, I don't know if you've ever watched Sex and the City.
Yes. Which one?
Well, the series. I prefer the
Yeah.
series to the movies personally, but there was the few episodes where Carrie starts dating this Russian guy, and she's saying how like he starts writing her poems and all this. And she's like,
Yeah.
"We're not used to this. Like it's too
Yeah.
much. Stop."
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, it's literally like that. It's just like, oh my God, why are you? You feel uncomfortable a little bit, right? Because we're just not used to it. Or most of us aren't used to it. So yeah, it was a nice change. Different for sure.
There's something interesting that you posted. You posted an Instagram post and you asked people around the world what the average age for marriage was. And
Yeah.
it turned out that Italy was quite high. And that really
Mhm.
surprised me because
Mhm.
you would assume from Italians, I mean, it's a very family oriented society, very close knit, community
Yep.
based. Marriage should be a big part of the culture, also very Catholic, right?
Mhm.
But it's not anymore, at least, or that's changing really fast. Have you been able to kind of think about it and pinpoint why that might be?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's for a variety of reasons, honestly. I think, you know, when I posted that and I kind of shared maybe why that was, because it was a thing in not just Italy, but in a lot of places in Europe, I came to find out, which was really fascinating. But specifically in Italy, you know, upon further reflection and just chatting with people, it kind of came out, maybe we do it differently in the US because the US is a very religious based culture. And people were like, well, the Vatican's in Italy. Italy is a very religious culture. Like that can't be it. And you just said it yourself just now. And it's interesting because yes, like it is, but also no, it's also not. I think the older generation is very much more religious. And in that way, it's more traditional. But the younger generation is kind of skewing away from that. It's not as tied to religion as I think the older generation is. And obviously that impacts the way marriage is viewed and seen. But I think it also stems up to, you know, from an economic standpoint, higher cost of living, much lower salaries. Italians have very low salaries compared to US and other surrounding countries. And so it's very normal for Italians, for example. It is so incredibly normal. Like I cannot stress it is like probably it would be strange to not have it be this way, but it's very normal for Italians to live with their parents until they're in the mid to late 20s, early 30s, even sometimes until they can save up and buy a house of their own or they get married and can live with somebody else, like that sort of thing. And that is not the norm in the US, for example, where I'm from. And so I think it's tied into both of those things, right? I think marriage is, Italians will date for 5 to 10 years before even the thought of marriage enters the chat. And even then, sometimes marriage isn't even on the table because it doesn't have as much value placed on it. And that's not to say it doesn't have value placed on it, but having a baby with somebody is more of a commitment than getting married to somebody in Italy. Like that's how it's viewed, right? I don't necessarily know why that is. I don't know if it's because of government programs. I don't know if it's because of tax breaks. I don't know why that is, honestly. It's just the way that the culture is. Marriage is just not as it doesn't have as much weight placed on it as like having a baby with somebody does, and definitely doesn't have as much weight placed on it as we do, for example, in the US and maybe also Canada.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned as well that, I mean, people live with their parents for such a long time. And I think that as much as I love Italy and as much as there are so many wonderful things about it, it's definitely different as an expat as opposed to being an Italian. Because what I hear from my Italian friends a lot of times is that finding a job and finding a well-paying job and actually getting out of the volunteering is quite difficult, because a lot of jobs will say, well, no, volunteer for a couple of years. And then a lot of times people are scared to ask for vacation because, oh no, if I take 2 weeks off, maybe I'll get fired or they'll replace me, or it's almost like you have to beg for things, And so this is what I've heard from Italians, and obviously Italians that have moved abroad that weren't happy with life in Italy. And it was really interesting. Actually, when I was in Munich, I met a bunch of Italian girls also from the north of Italy. And they told me that one of them has lived in Germany for 10 years at this point, and she just hated it. She just missed life, as she used to say. I miss life. I miss children crying, people laughing. I miss it,
Yeah.
And it was such an interesting conundrum, because they obviously moved to Germany to get work because there wasn't work back in Italy. And they told me they felt really stuck. It almost felt like there was a ceiling above their head, that they weren't able to achieve what they wanted to achieve. And life was in the moments, like people really enjoyed the moments, but there wasn't anything beyond that. There wasn't anything to work towards. But the girl that has lived there for 10 years, she just turned 40, and she had like a real crisis, like not a midlife crisis, but almost a midlife crisis, I would say. And she moved back to Italy. She couldn't handle it. But apparently from the story that I heard, she moved back to Italy, she met an Italian, and now they're getting married. So, and it all happened in the span of a week.
It's always how it works, huh?
When I asked my friend to clarify, she said she met Alberto on a walk. She petted his dog, invited her for fish dinner at his parents' house.
Of course he did. Of course he did. See, that is the story that everybody listens to. Not the jazz club. Everybody's like, we went to go eat fish at his parents' house and then we got married. Like, it's so Italian.
And it was funny because this was the girl, she really didn't like Germany. And when I would say Germans they're attractive, she would say, no, they're not attractive. What are you talking about? This is just the outside, but inside is boring, But she found her happiness.
Used to Italians, hey, listen, I get it. If it's from, I don't know German culture that well, but from what I can understand about it, it's night and day from Italian culture, where Italians again are just more upfront and open and romantic. And yeah. And what you said about taking life and living in the moment, it is so spot on with Italian culture. Like they do live life in the moment and they take advantage of life. And it's something I think maybe going back to big culture shocks, that was a really big culture shock for me coming from New York, where everything was like, go, go, go and hustle and like plan for the future and think of the future and like just nonstop hustle. Right. And coming to a culture that values life over work and quality of life over work was a very big change, but something that I think I've really grown to love. It was something that I hated at first because I was so not used to it. It was like one of those growing pains, one of those culture shocks. And yeah, it's definitely something that I've grown to love.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hear that comparison a lot between like US,
Mhm.
especially, places like New York, where it's
Yeah.
constantly like next thing and then on to the next thing. And it's like grab a
Mhm.
coffee to go and, grab a quick lunch, eat it. And there's so many posts and reels done about the same thing from like I follow other Italian creators as well. They make funny posts about living in the US and like eating
Yeah.
eating lunch at your desk and then back to work you go and this kind of thing. And there's a lot of truth
Yeah.
to that. Yeah.
Yeah, you will never see like that. That's another thing. Like when I asked one of my friends one time, like, how can you tell who's American? Like, I'm just so curious. How can you tell that we're American? And he was like, you guys eat on the go. He's like, you guys are always eating when you're walking. And it's so true. It's so true. Italians, like they take their time. They take their time and they enjoy the little moments. And it's something really beautiful. Um, of just like appreciating the little moments and finding time to enjoy them and not, again, going back to this idea of just embracing life and taking advantage of it instead of working to the bone and hustling and constantly like in motion. It's just they know when to stop and they know when to rest. They know when to play and they know when to rest.
Would you say that's your favorite part about living in Italy?
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's one of them. Yeah, I have many parts, but it's one of them. It's just this idea of, especially coming from, let me just go back, especially coming from that culture and that mindset and that place that I was in of just, I was so burnt out and I was so tired and I was so exhausted and just like, I could not do the hustle culture anymore. It like completely broken me. And then coming to this culture where it was just like valuing stopping and resting and like spending time with family and spending time with friends and spending quality time with those people. And not taking, not spending every single waking moment working. Like they really did, they know how to differentiate between the two. And it was again, it was one of those things that I hated, and now it's one of the things that I love.
Yeah. The ability to not stress so much about what's going to happen or um,
Mhm.
what you need to do, and just kind of take the moment and really enjoy it, because at the end of the day, I mean, that's what life is really. It's just a collection of moments, right?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's what your friend said. It's what your friend said about I miss life. Like when you said that, she said that, I understood immediately what she meant. It's just like they just know how to live and they take advantage of life.
And that's interesting that you mentioned that you had a burnout, because I feel like that's a really common phenomenon nowadays, especially with Americans. And one of the
Mhm.
reasons I can imagine the creators that move to Europe have so much success, because there are so many Americans um, wanting to see what else is out there because they're not satisfied with their life. And so I've actually been tracking that and seeing, like, whenever I post videos that are like Americans versus Europeans, people love that stuff, because obviously Americans are always like kind of seeing how can they change their life. They
Mhm.
feel like the American dream, that there's no dream anymore. It's not as it's just go go go,
Yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
that's why Europe has grown in popularity really recently. The European dream is now more
Yeah.
important, more popular than the American dream, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking it's funny because I was actually talking, to Dario about this today. We had a really long conversation about this today because I feel like there's the two phrases, right? There's the American dream and the Italian equivalent is La Dolce Vita, which people like that's what people come trying to experience. They try to experience this La Dolce Vita. And I have so many Italians. I'm going to expand it to say Europeans, but I have so many Europeans who, when they find out I moved to Italy, they're like, that's a horrible choice. Like you just lost all this opportunity. Why would you leave the American dream? Like, oh my God, the amount of Italians I get that they're like, you left the American dream to come here. Like it got so fun. Like they're like, what did you do? And it's so interesting because when you take a step back, like this American dream, I don't know if it I don't think it has the same meaning that it once did. Um, I think it's now tainted by a dark stain in the fine print, where it's just constant work and constant hustle and constant this at the sacrifice of your mental and physical and emotional well-being to achieve success. Whereas La Dolce Vita, on the other hand, which on a side note is so funny, so many Italians, when they don't understand what La Dolce Vita is, because to them it's just life. They don't understand what people are coming to seek. But this idea of la dolce vita is this idea that if all the other physical, things were stripped away, the emotional and mental well-being of the person would still be in full spirit. And that's like the two painful differences between this American dream and la dolce vita, is one is putting well-being at the forefront and the other one is putting material gain at the forefront. And that's, it's not to say, because kind of going back to what you're talking about, the difficulties of Italy, like there are so many difficulties in Italy. It's not a perfect paradise. It's not a perfect utopia, right? Even thinking of like career advancement and things like that, it's very difficult to advance in career here. Again, I was just talking with Dario about this. But I think people that are seeking this American dream, they see just the number, they see just the stamp at the front without seeing all the difficulties that are happening behind it, right? It is very true. I think a lot of Americans are kind of waking up to that, and seeing that maybe we've been a little brainwashed in believing that what our culture is like is the only culture and is the only right way to do things, which is just simply not true. And that's why it's so important to travel, and why it's so important that we share culture differences like you're doing, like I'm doing. Like there's so many other creators that are doing this, and it's so important, because when you understand that what you have known and what you are used to and what is in your little bubble is not the only way that things have to be done, it is just so beneficial. It's just so beneficial to not only you, but to everybody around you, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's and
Get off my pedestal. Sorry.
No, I think that was really interesting. And I think when it comes to love as well, when it comes to finding love, because a lot of times we struggle so much in our country, and it's just because we maybe don't feel a compatibility with our culture and the way of doing things. And maybe we would be better, we would thrive somewhere else. That is not to say that, as you said, like Italians think Americans have it easy, and they do, in a way, because they're, you're able to get a well-paying job, you're able to advance in your career, and you're able to really like achieve anything you want to achieve. And there is that in the culture. There's that positivity of like, you can be whatever you want to be because you can. The sky is the horizon. Whereas in Italy, I feel like that's much, much harder. And so I can imagine Italians being like, look, I'm 20 something. I'm still living with my parents. What are you telling me about my life and it being so great? Sure, I have my friends and my, and I drink coffee, and we have dinners, and like it's a fun time, but like I want to be more. I want to be better than that. And so I can imagine that being like the driver for them to move to the US. And then of course in the US, maybe they're feeling that they're missing that piece that they left back at home, which was just the simple life. So there's no right or wrong, as you rightly said, like both have its pluses and minuses, but I think you're right. Like in the US, I mean, especially, things are getting so expensive, and we have to pay such high tips, and going out is a process. Like in Canada, it's the same,
Yeah. Oh yeah, I believe it. No, I think it really does come down to that idea of just like the grass is always greener on the other side. Or just like, it's very difficult to see. And like, we're all guilty of this, right? Like we are all guilty of this. It's very difficult to see the good that is happening in the place that you're in when you are so blinded to it, right? Like it's very difficult to see the good things that surround you. Example A, I was the first one to criticize the US when I was living in it. I was like, this is, oh my God, first one to criticize. As soon as I moved abroad, I became more patriotic than I've ever become in my life living abroad. It's just like, it's a very different, and that's not to say like kind of what you're going off of. There is no perfect utopia. There is no perfect country. There is no perfect anything, right? Like there are pros and cons to both. There are amazing things about the US. There are amazing things about the US. There's also a lot of issues, in the same way that there are amazing things about Italy, and there's so many things that we can take and learn from this culture here. There's also a lot of problems. You take and receive, and you see what is working for you and what is going to be the deal breaker, and just kind of what works best for you, And I think, again, that's why it's so important to share that, because what you don't know, right?
So you've mentioned that there are some things that you really still miss about the US, right? What are those things that you've come to appreciate ever since living the US?
Yeah, I mean, of course, on the standpoint, I miss my friends and my family. I miss my people. I miss, that aspect. But I also, on a bigger platform, I just I miss my culture. I miss my language. I miss my traditions. I miss things that are normal to me, right? Like I miss, oh my gosh, I miss regular crunchy Cheetos and just being able to go into any CVS and get those. I miss being able to like get a really big, like large iced coffee to go. Like I love that. And I miss having ranch as an option for my make your own salad bar, like little things like that, as well as just big things. Like I miss being able to walk into a store and not have to practice what I'm saying in my head beforehand. And then inevitably when the other person goes off script, having to panic about them going off script and me not knowing what to say. Like, it's just, there's a lot of things that I miss for sure.
Americans, they always bring about such a array of points and opinions from people. Whenever I make American content, what Europeans think of Americans, oh, Americans are so fake, and they say things that they don't mean. I can see why they might think that, because they're, especially when we're looking at like certain types
Gosh.
of and also depending on where you are. Like in LA, people I think are more superficial, and you probably agree. But I think on the whole, when I'm traveling Europe or when I'm anywhere else, if I meet an American, I know they will help me. I know they will be friendly.
Mhm.
I can count on it, and I know how to talk to them. And I know
Yeah.
that it's easy. You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
had this experience
Right.
where I was flying out of Austria to go back to Canada,
Mhm.
but I couldn't fly through the US. And so Austrians are very by the book. I think stereotypes are often there for a reason. And that's a really true stereotype, in my opinion. And so I was trying to kind of talk to them and, try to have a human heart to heart, like, look, can I change the ticket? What can I do? And their answer was very by the book. These are the regulations. There's nothing that we're going to do. This is, this is it. This is it. And so I remember calling, like, I think it was United, and having a conversation with them. And the lady answers the phone and she's like, honey, I totally understand what you're going through. This really, really sucks. I really feel for you. And right away, that like touch of human, like understanding, made it so
Mhm.
much easier and so much nicer to have a conversation with her. And I was super thankful. And that was like on the
Yeah.
contrast of those two things. Yeah, and this just happens all the time to me. If I meet an American, like oftentimes, like it's just very easy to strike a conversation with them. Sure, yes,
Yeah.
they can be fake, or the customer service is very much like over the top sometimes. I can agree to
Yeah.
that, but
I completely understand, but like, because I get that all the time too. People are like, why are Americans like, they're so fake? They're just giving like compliments out to people. And I always say, I'm just like, it's not, I can see why, if you don't come from American culture, why you would think that's ingenuine, especially being in Europe where Europeans, like they, I shouldn't blanket statement like that, but just like in a general sense, are very less likely to like strike up a conversation with a stranger or like compliment somebody just because they can. And I think that's the difference with Americans, is just when people say Americans are fake for giving out compliments, for example, I'm like, they're not. Like it's just part of the culture of there. It takes nothing out of my day to acknowledge this other person as a human being and make them feel good. And it's one of those things that's like, even if it wasn't genuine, like that person doesn't know, so they can walk away being like, wow, I had a really good interaction and I'm feeling good about my day, and they move on with their life. And it's just, I think that's a really big difference with Americans. It's just like there's this innate sense of like kindness and recognizing that other humans are humans, and this is just, it goes to a certain point, but yeah, there's just an innate sense of like positivity, I think. It's hard. It's a hard thing to battle, especially explaining this to Europeans when I'm, even when I was in the UK last week, or 2 weeks ago, my waitress had like these really cool nails. And I was like, oh my God, like I love your nails. Those look so good. And she was a little like, oh gosh, thanks. Like she didn't know what to do because I just like slapped her with a compliment. And she was like, do they really look good? Like, I was like, yes, of course they look good, And it's just, it's one of those things that I think is a little less common over here, in many cultures. And it's a very big difference between that and American culture. To, the point of what you said, like Americans, we love talking to strangers in a general sense. We love talking to strangers. we have very easy conversations with strangers. And in that sense, it's very, easy to open up. And I've heard a lot from a European, so I'm curious if you've heard this as well. I think the difference is that Italians, for example, they are very kind, but when you are like deep with an Italian, like when you are close with an Italian, you form that bond, like it is a deep bond. Whereas like maybe in the US, like from a European standpoint, it can be hard to kind of form deeper connections because they don't know if that person's just being kind or if they genuinely want to get to know. And I can see why that would be hard to decipher between what's just like a kind interaction and what's like a deep friendship,
Yes. They Europeans have the opinion that they have of Americans is that Americans switch friends like they switch clothes. Like it's just like,
I've
oh,
heard
hey,
that.
I'm your friend, I'm your friend, I'm your friend. And they just think
Yeah.
that, and there's truth to that. Of course, I think it's the peach and coconut, right? Culture. It's like
Yeah.
Americans are very much like a peach culture, but the pit is still there. So it's like they can be, because I think like if you are friendlier with most people, if you do find it easy to strike up conversations, it doesn't always mean that you want to be friends with every single person. You're just nice to people, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. But I think that opens the door for something more potentially. If two people are on the same page, maybe they have a vibe going and they want to get to know each other more. I think that opens the door much easier than if you just don't interact with one another. Then how are you going to make friends, right?
Absolutely. Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's like this tricky, I don't know. It's tricky because I can see both sides. Right. And it's just, yeah.
But I love the fact that we're kind of comparing Italian and American culture, because a lot of times when I say Europeans are more closed off, people will say, no, but what about Italians? What about like Southern Europeans? They're very, very open. And I do agree that, yeah, to an extent they are open, but in a different way, not in the same way that Americans are. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to also acknowledge that like Italy is very diverse from north to south. Like Northern Italians, Northern Italians are night and day from Southern Italians. Florentines, for example, kind of have this reputation of being a little bit more closed off culturally, a little bit more closed off emotionally. Whereas Southern Italians are known to be like very open, very warm, very kind. And it does ring true. Like Southern Italians, every interaction I've had with Southern Italians, they are just like ready to party. They are ready to like invite you to their house for a fish dinner. Like it's just what's very normal. So I can totally see that. Yeah. Yeah.
Always the fish dinner.
Always the fish dinner. Always.
So living with Dario, I mean, have there been like some cultural differences you've noticed just like on a day-to-day basis, that like he eats different food or he does things differently, or something that you've laughed about or argued about?
Oh God. Yeah. Where do you want to start? So
just lay it on
food is night and day. Well, let me tell you the story. So one of the first times, it was when Dario and I were still long distance. And it was the first time I really realized how Italians, how seriously they take their food and how proud they are of their food. Mind you, Dario is a chef. I'm just going to put that, it's important to note that here. But we were still long distance.
He's a chef. He's a chef.
He's a chef. Yeah. That's why I was saying from scratch, when people are like, oh, it's like from scratch. I'm like, it kind of actually is, but hopefully not. Anyway, we were FaceTiming as we did, because we had our set times during the day that we FaceTimed. And it was lunchtime for me at that point. So I had him propped up on, just my counter, and I was making pasta. And so I'm telling him about my day. I'm taking out the spaghetti. And as I'm telling him about this day, I took that spaghetti and I went boom, and I broke it right in half. And all I heard was the softest, faintest. And I was like, what? I was like, what happened? And he was like, I turned around and he's just like pale a little bit. And he was like, why would you do that? I was like, do what? What did I do? He's like, why would you break the spaghetti? And I came to find out that it's kind of when you break a spaghetti in Italy, it's like breaking an Italian's arm. But the fact that Dario is a chef, it's like I had taken that arm and ripped it off completely. And I was like, this is how I get it to fit in the pot. And he he went full Italian at this point because he just, he's Italian, hands and all. He was like, get a bigger pot. And it was just like, it was probably our first big funny cultural difference in that way. Which is quite funny. And a lot of it comes down to food. Gosh, another like savory breakfast. The first time he was in New York, I loved eggs. I love eggs for breakfast. I was making us egg burritos. I was like, let me do a little cooking for the chef here. So I started making an egg burrito. I put it down. He was like, oh, eggs. Why are we eating eggs for breakfast? He was confused. Because here in Italy, they do sweet breakfasts.
Nutella.
And so, yeah, Nutella. Yeah. And so it's a thing every morning. He has his sweet breakfast and I am up making pesto eggs, which he doesn't understand, but he's very sweet and respectful. Respectful. So I eat my pesto eggs and he eats his croissant with Nutella.
Not to hate on you Italians, but I would say Kacie's breakfast is much healthier than eating chocolate for breakfast.
This podcast will go viral with you saying that.
It's so true.
I'm waiting for the comments. It's like,
listen,
I love a savory breakfast. I can do a sweet breakfast every now and then, but I am an egg burrito. I'm also though, like, I don't know if you're this way. I can eat anything for breakfast. Like you can catch me eating chicken nuggets with barbecue sauce at 7 a.m. I don't have a problem with it. It's something that like Dario is utterly confused by. He doesn't get it. But yeah. No.
Yeah, I prefer savory breakfast as well. And I sometimes eat very weird breakfast, but that's my Russianness coming in, like caviar and herring and all this weird stuff. And I've had people react to that.
That's your caviar and herring is my like dino nuggets and barbecue sauce. Like it's okay.
But the burrito is a very American thing. Like you guys put everything in burritos. That's not a Canadian thing.
Oh, we love it. No, we love it. We
Breakfast
love a burrito moment. Yeah, it gets us excited. You get to roll things in a burrito. You get to eat it all together. It's thrilling. Of course we love it. It's exciting. It's the little things, it makes us happy. Let us have it, okay?
But it's interesting, because you're right. Like Italians, whenever it comes to how to piss off an Italian, the quickest way to do it is through food. There's so many memes, so many posts, so many reels done about that. But it really is such a true thing. I mean, the best way to get an Italian riled up is to start like ordering cappuccino after like 2 p.m. or just like even being like, oh, let me mix different foods around on my plate. I had a friend from Napoli and she had a lot of character as people from Napoli do. And she would yell at me, you cannot mix the pasta with a salad on the plate. It's not good. You shouldn't do that. And I couldn't eat in front of her because she was just eat one thing at a time. It was like, it was tough.
There was one time I was with my friend and we went out to dinner and like we were so hungry and we wanted all the food at one time. Like we were like, bring out the salad. That's usually a starter. Bring out like our pasta. You can bring out the meat at the same time. Like we were just bringing it out at the same time. The man was so confused. This poor sweet Italian boy. He was like, tutto insieme. He was like all together. And I was like, yeah, like bring it all at once. And he was like, he like had to go check with his boss if it was okay. It was really funny. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Putting cheese on top of fish pasta, putting chicken on pasta. Oh yeah. Have
you seen a video where they went around, they were in Naples and they were like delivering pizza with pineapple on it and they got beaten up? There's a viral video where people were the delivery guy, like it was a prank, but someone really took it seriously and they beat them up for delivering pineapple pizza.
You know what? I want to be like, wow, that's horrible. But like, I would tell nobody to go to Naples of all places and do that prank. I'd be like, at least go to like Rome or somewhere north, but Naples, like the birthplace of pizza. I'm like, I can't blame them. Of course they beat them up, but no, that's not, it's okay. No.
Yeah. Pizza is religion. But my last question for you is, how has Italy changed you as a person?
Oh my gosh. Wow. What a loaded question.
Yeah.
In so many ways. I could go on and on about the ways that it's changed me. Kind of going back to our old conversation. I was somebody who, hustled. I pounded the pavement. I worked and worked and worked. And I came from a very individualistic culture. I came from one that rewards work and hustle and kind of demonizes rest. And so coming into a culture where that is the complete opposite, of course, changes you as a person. You start to appreciate the little things. You start to see, that life has so much more value than just, working and letting it pass you by. It just, yeah, it's made me appreciate life more. It's made me appreciate the little things. It's made me enjoy the little things. It's made me realize that, uh, you know, life goes on, the world moves on, and it's all okay. Like, I don't know how to explain it better than that. It's changed me fundamentally in that way as a person, for sure.
Do you feel happier in Italy than you had back home?
Yeah, I do. And it's another hard question to answer, right? But like,
Yeah.
I think Italy and the culture here matches more with what I need as a human. Um, and that's very different for everybody because like people move to Italy and they might not be happier, right? But for me, I'm 10 times happier here than I was in the US. My quality of life is better. My view on life is better. Yeah, it's just I don't see myself moving back to the US.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you talked about the American culture, because American culture, when I think of it, it's kind of like the verb do. It's like you do. What do you do is the first question that people
Mhm.
ask you. And again, I'm kind of
Oh my
quoting
gosh.
"Eat, Pray, Love" here or something like that. But
Actually, yeah. You're
isn't
right.
it?
That's so true. Yeah, you're so right. Yeah, it's so spot on. Yeah.
And I think that as much as and you can probably relate to me being a creator, there it's so much fun, and it can be stressful, but it's so exhilarating doing what we do. Like I love what I do, and when I have too much rest, I get bored. Like I miss doing what I do,
Yeah.
but this is because I genuinely love my profession, and it's understanding more about people and cultures. But with people that are going to the office and working their asses off day to day, and then just taking a week vacation and going to an all inclusive, I see people like that here. Like, people that
Mhm.
are like red from a day of sun, but just like trying to maximize their 1 week vacation and get as drunk as possible and to dance on the table. And like, that was it. That was the 1 week of vacation that I had left, and then back to real life. And I don't
Mhm.
personally believe in real life, because I don't believe that real life has to be a grueling affair where you just like work
No.
nine
And
to
it
five,
shouldn't be.
and it
It
shouldn't be.
shouldn't be.
We shouldn't live
But
like that. In my personal opinion, maybe I come from like a place of privilege because I work for myself, but
no.
um, just going home, watching Netflix, going to sleep, waking up, and
Mhm.
doing it all over again. And then just like living in the future and living weekend to weekend where you get drunk and again, eat, pray, love. You take your 6 pack of beer and you drink it and you say, this is nice. This is a good life, and you
Yeah.
don't really enjoy it. So I, I do think that that's I don't want to say that's an incorrect way to be, but with all the studies that they've done into human happiness, that's not the healthiest way to be, because we're not doers, we're beings, right? Like we should just be sometimes.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I totally agree. And the unfortunate part is that like, it's a lot of people don't have the choice, right? A lot of people, like kind of what you said, like so many people, that is their reality. And it's what, it's not necessarily their fault. Let's
Yeah.
say that's the situation that they're in. Right. Um, yeah.
100%. I mean, we have family holding us back. We have health situations holding us
Mhm.
back, lack of money,
Mhm.
lack of just whatever, family you're born into.
But I think, in that aspect, there are still opportunities in our life, no matter where we are, no matter what our situation is, there is always opportunities to live as bravely as we can within our own circumstances. And so that's what I kind of hope to keep sharing about.
Yeah, and I love this about your social media, because you are just a girl next door. Like you have that feeling of the girl that people can relate to. You're not some girl that's like has her lips done and is just like sitting there like in perfect lighting, like enjoying her perfect life, her perfect Turkish breakfast or whatever. That used to be the Instagram. Remember that
Mhm.
Instagram where there was like a perfect like hair done, everything is perfectly done, and
Yeah.
there she is enjoying her breakfast that was carefully crafted for the
Yeah.
Instagram shot. And so like people have grown so
Yeah.
tired of this kind of fake posy Instagram
Yeah.
posts, and they crave real people like you that are just like, hey, I was scared, but I did this. And your profile is very real. And I think, and your Instagram page is very relatable. And that's why people, it gives them a sense of hope. Like, hey, I can relate to Kacie. She's very approachable.
Thanks.
She's very real. If she can do it, maybe I can as well.
Thank you. That's very sweet. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, it's just yeah, I think that there's, I always want to keep it real on my socials, and I never want to sugarcoat things, and I never want to just make it like a curated experience, because that's not what life is. Life is not curated, and like shit happens. And I think it's important that we normalize that. And I think it's important that we share those hard moments, because that's what we all go through. We all go through that. And if we curate it and we try to, put a filter on it and make it beautiful, like it's not, it's not reality. It's not what real life is. Yeah. So I said, I'll share all my mistakes and all the embarrassing ones and the cringy ones and all the, all of it.
And can I ask how long you've been creating content for? Has it been since you moved to Italy?
Yeah, girl, I fell into this by accident. I didn't do this on purpose. I moved, I started creating content when I moved to Italy. I uploaded a video, having never really used social media before that. I uploaded a video when we were on the plane moving to Italy. Shut down my phone and opened it up 17 hours later, and the video had gone viral. It was a video about me and Dario, our relationship, just kind of detailing our relationship. Video had gone viral, and at that point, again, Italy had 2-week mandatory quarantine. So I was like, well, what else am I gonna do but create content in line, I guess, while I'm sitting inside. And then it just continued to grow and grow and grow.
Yeah, for
Thanks.
sure. You have amazing numbers, especially considering the fact that you've only been doing this for a few years. That's
Yeah.
actually pretty impressive. And you
Yeah.
have a book coming out, which is going to be about all about your experiences moving to
Yes.
Italy. So I'm
Yes.
actually
Yes.
super excited to read it. I love
Ah!
books. I love books that talk about well, first of all, like stories. I love stories from people, and I also love stories of like moving countries. That just really inspires me. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Thanks.
definitely read it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I'm really excited. I'm really, really excited. It's my story of just, taking advantage of life and lessons that I've learned about traveling and living abroad and embracing failure and doing the shit that scares you. Yeah, I'm excited. Thank you.
So, on this note, Kacie, thank you so much for taking part in the podcast. For anyone that was watching this or listening to this, you don't understand how many technical issues we've had along the way. Maybe,
Just put
and Kacie said maybe you should create a blooper reel of just us messing up. So maybe
just
I'll do that.
at the end of this podcast, just put the 2-minute recording that you have of me just sitting in the waiting room being like, well, she'll come back eventually. It's gonna be great. We got it. We did it.
We did it. Yeah, exactly. Guys, if you enjoyed listening to it, then please let us know in the comments below. Well, on YouTube, most likely, but also on Spotify and Apple. And check out Kacie in case you haven't you haven't heard of her, you haven't seen her yet, which I'm assuming if you're watching this, you probably have heard of her, but nevertheless, go check her out. I'm also going to link the book when it comes out. And you can pre-order the book already, right? So
yes, you can
cool.
pre-order it. It's available on Audible, via Kindle, via all the things. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to link to it right away so you guys can pre-order it. And Kacie, once again, thank you so, so much. Love talking to you. It was such a real conversation. I love it when I can just relax and, like it's like a friend to friend kind of conversation instead of like a formal sit down interview. So it's nice.
Yeah.
It's refreshing.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for having me. This is awesome.